Hello, this is, well, good morning. It's morning for me. I'm not sure what it is for you. It might be afternoon or it might be the middle of the night, actually. But welcome to class number 7 on performance, testing, and flaws. A lot of different aspects of fabric that we'll discuss today. For class today, you're going to need your swatch book, so make sure you have that handy. You're also going to need a magnifying glass and some sort of a ruler or a tape measure. You're just going to have to be able to measure about a 1-inch section. So go ahead and grab those right away if you don't have those handy. Remember the magnifying glass, there is an app on your, if you have a smartphone, you should be able to download an app if you don't have access to a magnifying glass. So as I said, take a minute and go ahead and grab those. So I'm waiting for you to grab those items this morning. Okay, so just a quick review. We talked about finishes and backings last week. So on fabric structure, which we talked about, that is how cloth is blank, and fabric design, how cloth blanks. Okay. And then the final steps on fabric are blank and blank. Okay, so fabric structure is how cloth is made. Hopefully you came up with that answer, which we talked about over several weeks of this class. Fabric design is how cloth looks, the way that it appears to us. And then the final steps that we talked about last week are finishes and backings. So I'd like you to pull out your swatch kit right now and find fabric swatches that have both a finish and a backing. Okay, go ahead and do that now. I found 5, but see if you can find at least 4 fabrics that have both a finish and a backing. So I'll give you just a few minutes to do that right now. Both a finish and a backing. And then go ahead and just write down those 4 that you can find, 4 fabrics that have both a finish and a backing. And that will finish our review from last week. I'll give you just another minute to do that. All right, take another 30 seconds to find at least 4 fabrics in your swatch kit that have both a finish and a backing. Which is easy to do if you're up to date on your notes on your swatch kit. Those should already be written in there, finishes and backings. Okay, like I mentioned, I found 5, so hopefully you have found at least 4 of those. The first one being 19, if you'll turn to 19 in your swatch kit. That is a jacquard, a contract seating, a commercial fabric in kind of a light gray and a green and a bit of a gold are the 3 colors on that. And you'll see on the finish line for that has a stain-resistant finish on it and an adhesive backing. So that has both a finish and a backing. Turn to number 32, and you'll see that also has a finish and a backing. It's a velour. The finish is a shearing, and it has an adhesive backing. The 2 things that we're looking for now that we talked about in our lecture last week. Also, number 36 in your swatch kit, that is a brushed tricot, and it has a finish, which is a shearing finish. Remember, the shearing is the cutting. It's made with a loop, and then they cut it or shear it to give it that feeling. It has an adhesive backing. Another finish that it has is that it's stain resistant, so that's our 3rd one. Hopefully you also found number 73 in the swatch kit, which is a textile wall covering. It has a finish, which is a Teflon finish, which is a stain resistant finish, and it has an acrylic latex backing on it that makes it appropriate as a wall covering. Our last one that has both a finish and a backing would be number 75, which is another wall covering. It has an embossed finish on that, and it has an acrylic backing to make that appropriate for a wall covering. So there are 5 in your books that have both finishes and backings, which are the treatments that we talked about in our lecture last week. You watched a video this week to introduce you to today's lecture. The video was on performance, testing, and flaws, all things that we look for in fabrics. And the video was called Smarty Pants Testing the Quality of Textiles. Okay, so grab a ruler, as I mentioned, that shows a 1 inches. Many terms were used in this video that you're already familiar with. And, well, let's go ahead and review the notes on what this testing was about. You saw a section on burning, tearing, and ripping, kind of it looks like medieval torture on textiles. It talked about the thread count. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. Let's count number 2. Well, let's go ahead and finish reviewing this list, and then we'll come back and talk about thread count. It mentioned crocking, which is color transfer. It mentioned color fastness, where sueding brings dyes to the surface, and crocking is color transfer, which we hope to never have on wet and dry fabrics, where the color transfers from one surface to another. Sweating, does the acid of perspiration break down color bonds? Physical destruction, you saw that. Seam ripping, it should happen before the fabric rips. And we'll do some more testing on fabric that today. So we were taught in this video that the seam is actually easier to fix than the fabric tear. We talked about pilling, which we'll review again in this class. We saw a snagging machine. And you saw burning test. So it must take longer than 4 seconds to burn. And the video finished with the classic line, "These look good on you, Timmy, and they won't set you on fire." Weren't we glad to know that? Okay, so back to this concept of thread count. Let's look at a couple of fabrics, starting with number 2 in your swatch kit. So I want you to thoroughly understand the concept of thread count. So number 2 in your swatch kit, like I said, we're going to start with that one. And that one's fairly easy to count. I want you to go ahead and look at those warp threads and the weft threads, and go ahead and measure off 1 inch of those across the fabric, and you can count how many threads are in 1 inch. And I come up with about 11 or 12 on that. Okay, we're going to also look at number 12 for thread count. It's also easy to see on that houndstooth. And if you count, you might need to use your magnifying glass on that. So if I lay my ruler on that and count how many threads there are in 1 inch. I'm going to come up with something like 18, perhaps. Maybe somewhere between 18 and 20 threads across that. All right, let's look at one more, a sheeting, which is number 82 in your swatch kit. And that one, it is impossible to count the threads. Even if I look at that under magnification, on that sheeting, I can't count the threads. There's so many threads across in that it's impossible to count. Now, here is a slide of some, it's so, I'm actually going to use my magnifying glass to look at it. That's an 800 thread count, right? And so what does that actually mean? I actually have sheets that are 800 thread count and sheets that are 1200 thread count. It means there are actually 800 threads in an inch of that fabric, or 1200 shows us that there would actually be 1200, and that is the threads are so fine that we can't even really count them with the naked eye. And your finer sheets are the ones that have the higher thread count. So that's just a quick introduction on thread count, which is something that you need to understand. In the fabric testing world, for testing performance and flaws, there are some organizations that oversee this in fabric. You don't need to memorize the names of these. You just need to be somewhat familiar with them. They're the ones that test fabric before it is available to be sold. The ASTM, American Society for Testing and Materials. They are a nonprofit organization that develops standards through a voluntary consensus. The AATCC, American Association of Textile Chemists and Colorists. Individuals from both the textile and chemical communities form the research committees that have developed standards for controlling color. AFMA, American Furniture Manufacturing Association, they oversee residential furniture performance testing. And the ACT, Association for Contract Testing, is the company that oversees contract textiles or commercial textiles, those that are purchased for commercial applications. So like I said, you just need to have somewhat of an understanding that there are organizations that oversee the testing and of residential and commercial textiles. Are you familiar with Lucy? Lucille Ball. Well, that was just for fun. I hope you enjoyed that. I've always loved watching old Lucy episodes. And certainly that was on quality control, which has to do with performance, testing, and flaws. Candy World has nothing to do with the fabric world. But our assembly lines are a difficult place to work. And I thought that would just be a fun distraction on performance testing and fabric and flaws. Okay, so back to our fabric. Let's talk about fabric performance. Durability, color fastness, flammability, all very, very important aspects of fabric performance. We certainly want our fabrics to be durable. That refers to how well a fabric holds up under wear and tear. For example, my husband said recently, "Why is my toe creating a hole in my sheet?" And that had more to do with his sleeping patterns, I think, than the performance of the fabric. He actually wore a hole through a sheet, and it was fairly new, and I just patched it up and put it back on his bed. Anyway, we want our fabrics to be certainly to be durable. We want them to have color fastness, how well it maintains its color over time. We want to not say, after pulling something out of the laundry, "My white t-shirt is now pink." What's the reason for that? Well, something white, your t-shirt was washed with something that didn't have color fastness. It was washed with something red, and those colors bled. We don't want that to happen. We want our fabrics to not only be durable, but to have color fastness. Also, flammability. We want to know whether it supports a flame when it is exposed to heat or flame. And we're going to, you saw a little bit about that in the video that you watched for this class. We're also going to watch another video that tests us for the test fabric for color fastness. This is extremely important, not only for home applications, but for commercial applications. And you're going to, as an interior designer, need to know what the local building codes require. We mentioned that in class last week, but flammability, color fastness, durability, all things that we expect in our fabrics. We just have to be so careful with what we purchase, don't we? And sometimes we have these online disasters, either with fabric or with clothing, and you just got to be so careful because you never quite know what the durability is, or whether or not it's going to be something that you ordered that matches up what you saw online. You have to be certainly have to be careful. Okay, let's get back to durability in fabric performance. It's the most important performance characteristic to an end user, right? And perhaps durability is the most difficult performance characteristic to predict. Until we've used it, sometimes we don't know how durable it's going to be. So you as a designer will come to trust some companies over other companies. Once that you have bought fabrics from a particular manufacturer and use them, you will find out how durable they're going to be. Sometimes that's what it takes. You just have to actually use it and become familiar with that particular manufacturer. Quality control experts see very few wear problems in the field. Users usually tire of the fabric, or the fabric becomes soiled long before threads begin to break. So we often don't see how durable the fabric is because we want to change it out because we have tired of the fabric or it becomes too soiled to use any longer. Number 3, upholstery wear is often due to installation problems rather than structural weakness in the family. Wear occurs where chairs bump into tables or other pieces of furniture, or because of insufficient padding between the furniture frame and the fabric. And we'll often see this at the corner of a chair, maybe, where the fabric is pulled too tightly over the wooden frame, and it starts to wear because of that. And that would be considered a durability problem and also an upholsterer problem. Number 4, all fabric eventually wears out, certainly, and it's not considered a problem if the fabric has had an appropriately useful life. Sometimes, it's going to wear out eventually, but it's usually going to wear out. We're usually not going to see our fabric wear out because we're going to tire of it before it has a chance to wear out. Number 5, we have hand tests that we can perform on fabric to see how durable they are. We're going to do some of these right now: crushing, creasing, pulling across the bias. So first of all, I want you to turn to number 36 in your swatch kit. And this is where it's nice to be able to lift up the bottom of it and kind of handle it. And that is a brushed tricot. And I want you to actually take a pencil or a pen or use your fingernail to see if it's going to fuzz or pill. And you can do this to fabric before you buy it. You're going to kind of manhandle it. So I'm looking at this one, this brushed tricot, and I'm seeing if I can damage it with my fingernail or with my hand. And I can't. I'm using a mechanical pencil that has the pencil in it retracted so that it doesn't draw on it. And I'm actually trying to see if I can mar this fabric. And I can't. It's quite durable. I can see that it's holding up really well to scratches and running the point of this pencil over it. So that one's holding up really, really well. If we turn to number 39, which is a suede, real suedes are generally very, very easy to mark. And this one is a simulated suede. And again, I'm using this same pencil without the pencil that exposed on it, right? And I'm kind of trying to destroy this. And you can see, let me show you what I'm doing to it. I'm being very, very rough with it. And I'm seeing if I can leave a mark on it. I'm being really, really quite rough with it. And it's not marking it. And I'm going to kind of wrinkle it with my fingers. I'm going to pull it across the bias, do all these things to it to see how well it's going to hold up. And it's holding up very, very well. I'm also going to turn to number 40, which is right next door. That's a vinyl simulated leather. And a real leather would tend to mark easily, but this vinyl, let's see how well it has been made. I'm trying to wrinkle it. I'm scratching it with my fingernail. I'm running this mechanical pencil over it, and it's just not marking at all. So we've looked at 3 fabrics right now that are all very, very durable. And remember, you can do this to fabric before you buy it. Just kind of work on a small area and see how well it's going to hold up to whatever you can do to it. Number 6, fabric manufacturers spend countless dollars altering fabrics so that they pass wear tests. They want them to pass these tests so that they will be purchased. And many fabrics are removed from the market as they do not pass these tests. Just this week, for instance, I've been working on a silk quilt that I'm making for the Intermountain Hospital in Salt Lake City, a commission project. And I'm using probably, let's see, 9, 18, about 20 different Dupioni silks. And one of them, all of these silks I've put into a patchwork border. And as I was ironing it, there's one of the fabrics that doesn't hold up to the heat of an iron. So I don't know if a polyester snuck into the pile or if it's just a lower grade silk. But I'm going to go back to where I purchased this and ask for my money back, because this particular one of the 20 fabrics is not durable. It won't hold up to a hot iron, and it's taken me many, many hours to go back and pull that one fabric out of this patchwork design that I've done in the on this particular quilt. So very, very unhappy with the durability of one of the fabrics that I purchased. It should have been removed from the market before it ever made into the to store to be purchased. And I will let the manufacturer, or I don't know who the manufacturer is, but I'll take it back to the retail operation and insist on my money back, and insist that they take this one off the shelf, because it should not have ever made it onto the shelf. Number 7, larger manufacturers spend more money on wear tests than small companies. And the wear tests, are certainly inconsistent and may shed little light on a fabric's actual usefulness as the fabric, that I just mentioned. Okay, we're going to talk now about testing and how we can test different kinds of fabrics. Some of these you saw on the introductory video, but we're going to look at them a little bit more specifically. We're going to test for abrasion using a Weis-Beek test. We're going to test for slippage. We're going to test for break strength. We're going to test for color fastness. And we're going to talk about drapery, how drapery specifically should be tested. This just shows us a kind of a large Weis-Beek test. We'll look at a smaller one in just a minute. But as designers, you're responsible to make sure that the materials used pass the appropriate test for the end use. You've got to make sure that the fabric that you buy is going to hold up for whatever you and your client have chosen it for. As you look in your swatch books, go ahead and look now on any of the swatches and all of the information that you're writing in your swatch book, and you will complete that by about week 10 of the class. You'll have all of those lines completed. And so that's basically what a label is going to look like when you buy fabric. So I'm looking at number 23 right now, the crepe. And once you have filled out all the information in your book, you will have all the information that is going to look similar to the label, as though you are buying this particular green crepe. It's going to have all of those things listed. So you'll know exactly what the fabric name is, the content, the yarn type, its construction, how it was dyed, whether or not it has any finishes added to it that might make it color fast, or whether or not, you're going to learn a lot by just reading a label. So the easiest way to find out about fabric is to check the published information on the fabric samples that you buy. You should be able to read all of that information to see what tests it has gone through, to see how well it has held up to. You get the idea. So they're testing to see how durable it is, how it holds up to abrasion when it's been rubbed countless times by this machine. It's testing the durability by using perhaps a fine mesh wire screen, or they'll sometimes use a cotton duck, because abrasion on upholstery material is usually caused by human clothing, not by wire mesh. And the results are measured according to double rubs or oscillations back and forth. So it can be tested 1,000 times, 1,000 double rubs, or 500 double rubs. We're going to watch a video at the end of the class that's going to show you more specifically what double rubs look like. But every time you sit down on a couch and then stand up again, that's a double rub, because you've sat down on the couch and caused some abrasion on the couch, and then you're standing up again, which is going to rub your clothes against that couch a second time. So that's what's called a double rub, and that's what they're testing for in these abrasion machines. And there are obviously inconsistencies in the test. You could have machine operator error. It could depend on how tightly the fabric material or the fabric is put into the machine, or how often the abrasive material is changed in the machine. But the manufacturers are looking for certain test results to see actually how durable a fabric is going to be. And fabrics actually fail the test when thread breakage occurs, or a fabric starts to look worn. So those are the things that they're testing for abrasion on your fabrics. Those questions. So does this actually apply in the real world? I mean, you certainly wouldn't want a couch or a chair where the dyes or the colors from that fabric would end up on your clothes after sitting on it. And same thing in reverse. You wouldn't want the fabric or the the dye in the fabric that you're wearing to be transferred onto the clothing that you sit on. And you can imagine when fabrics were first starting to be woven and dyed that this would have been a real problem that had to be overcome in time, because dye is easily transferred unless it's been treated and so that it doesn't, so that you don't have problems with this crocking. So light fastness due to fading and due to crocking is something that your fabric has hopefully been tested for. I keep going back to these red silk curtains that I hung in our house in Newport Beach, California, that are fading due to light from the outside window. So it is, certainly a real problem. Silk tends to fade easily, which I didn't realize when I hung these. How easily it was going to fade on the south side of the house, which has a lot of sun exposure. Same thing in a beach house. You wouldn't want somebody coming in a wet swimming suit and sitting on a couch and having a dye transfer take place. So that's what crocking is, when this color gets transferred from one fabric to another one, and hopefully that's not going to happen to you, and that's why they test these fabrics for crocking before you purchase them. All right, testing draperies. Let's move away now from what we've been talking about and move on to draperies. As you can imagine, the weight of draperies is something that could affect how they hang and how they look after time. So you want to use fabrics that have been specifically tested to drape well and to hold their shape because, after the weight of them hanging in a window for some period of time. So normal durability tests are for seam slippage, making sure that the fabric doesn't tear, making sure that the seams don't come undone when they hang in your window. We're also testing for light fastness, certainly, because curtains are hung in windows, which is where light comes in. So they have to be tested for light fastness, and crocking must be evaluated. Crocking's not as big of an issue for draperies and curtains, because we generally aren't rubbing our clothing against that curtain, and chairs generally won't be rubbing against the curtain, so crocking is not as big of an issue. So fabric that is not designed specifically for draperies should be tested by making a panel of draperies to test for shrinking, elongation, or sagging. So your test panel should be at least 2 to 3 yards long, and you want to test it under the same humidity, light, and temperature conditions that will be present in the actual installation. So that's what you need to do if you're using a fabric that hasn't necessarily been manufactured for draperies. You need to test it as a drapery and see how well it hangs. Hang it from a rod in the right same location, same temperature, same humidity, same light where it's going to be used, and see how well it actually holds up. A good idea. This just shows another way of testing fabric for crocking, to test for color transfer, to see how much dye is transferred when it's rubbed, and we already saw this in the video, so I don't think we need to talk any more about that, except that crocking is tested in dry conditions and also in wet conditions. All right, there are tests that need to be done for wall coverings as well. Wall coverings are generally not tested for abrasion, because we assume that our furniture is not going to be rubbing against that wallpaper covered wall. So they're generally not testing them for abrasion, but they're tested for seam slippage, breakage, tensile strength, and for color fastness and crocking. You don't want there to be any dye transfer or fading due to the sunlight coming in on it. If you've ever hung wallpaper before, it's very important that it doesn't stretch or tear. And it's something that I recommend to you, hanging wallpaper, so that you can get a feel for what it's like and know what wall coverings are going to be best in different applications for your clients. When you're hanging it, it gets wet with glue on the back, which was the older technique. You would actually paint the glue on the back of the wallpaper. Some wallpaper that I hung just recently, I watched a video on YouTube, because I hadn't hung wallpaper for a couple of years, and now they're recommending that you actually put the paste on the wall and then add the wall covering that way, instead of putting the paste on the back, which is probably a good idea, because before, when you put the paste on the back of the wallpaper, it made that wallpaper less stable sometimes, so that when you would lift it up, it would tend to stretch a little bit because it was wet. So I think it is a better method now for putting the glue on the wall instead. Though I hung some wallpaper hangers here in this house recently, and they use the older method of actually applying the glue onto the back of the wallpaper. So anyway, two different methods you might want to become familiar with. When it is wet, you need to make sure that the colors don't run, and that's what it's been tested for. These wall coverings need to be tested to make sure that the color doesn't run when it's wet, and they need to be tested for crocking to ensure that the color won't transfer onto anything else that rub against it. Okay. My husband and I actually hung some wallpaper together many, many years ago. We'll never do it again because there's always a certain amount of slippage with wall covering, and it's almost impossible to get those patterns to match up exactly. And I had hung enough wallpaper before working with him on this project that I knew that that was the case, but it absolutely drove him nuts that it wouldn't match up down to like the 100th of an inch as he expected it to do. So needless to say, we never hung wallpaper again after that. But do know that your wall coverings have been tested for these things, slippage and crocking and light fastness before they're purchased, so that you should be able to get a good project. Okay, so just another way that your fabrics are tested for flammability. That's certainly important in your commercial applications, in your residential applications. In the fashion world, we certainly know that kids' pajamas have to be flame retardant, a very, very important thing, but you want all of your fabrics to be flame resistant. So they're tested for that and then given a grade as to how flammable they are. And then you have to, in a commercial application, you need to know what the fire codes are and make sure that the fabrics that you're using match up to the fire codes of that particular municipality. Okay. Let's see. So this slide just mentions the City of Boston code. It's known as one of the most stringent flame retardant tests, and we're going to mention a couple of other of those. Fabrics that pass this test are usually made of fibers that have been chemically modified to be flame retardant. So the testing information should be printed on the cards that accompany the textile swatch books. And this particular standard, the City of Boston Fire Code, is now used in many areas outside of Boston, and it has become kind of an industry standard. You're also going to run across the California Bulletin number 117. You'll see this when you record things in your swatch books. At least 13 of the swatches will say that they have passed California Bulletin number 117. So, for example, let's look at swatches number 2 and 3 in your book. And you will be writing on this one under codes and double rubs that this one has met California code number 117. If you haven't done it yet, you'll be writing this in, and you'll know that that California code 117 refers to a fire code. Okay, that the fibers have been chemically altered to make sure that they are not going to catch on fire very easily. You'll see the same thing on number 4. When you write in there the codes for that, you're going to be writing in California code 117 also. This one has been treated to be to hold up to fire. Both have been treated with fire retardant. Okay, and we're told that when they're treated, the fabric, the drape or the hand of the fabric should not be affected. In a few weeks, you're going to be given a test subject. You're actually at the end of the semester, you're going to design rooms or design furniture for 4 pretend clients. And one of your clients is going to be a cigar or a cigarette smoker. So you're going to need to choose fabrics that are fire resistant. So this is why we're mentioning this now. They need to hold up against a cigarette burn test, and most upholstery fabrics easily pass these tests. So remember, City of Boston Fire Code, California, the one that we just mentioned, California Bulletin 117. You're also going to run across California 133, which is a more stringent test. It tests the ability of a flame to pass through the upholstery to the interior foam, which is highly flammable. So flame-resistant foam, which is put inside chairs and such, is available, but it's thought to be very uncomfortable and more expensive. So they want the upholstery fabrics to be flame retardant enough so that the flames, it would take a long time for that flame to pass through into the flammable foam rubber that's inside. So upholstery fabrics can also be backed with an inflammable barrier, or the foam can be separately wrapped with an inflammable material. I think last week I mentioned about two leather couches, one a leather couch that I got from R.C. Willey and one that I got from Restoration Hardware. And the latter actually has foam. The one from Restoration Hardware actually had foam inserts that are covered with a flame retardant fabric. It was the first time I'd seen that when I was taking the leather covers off some of the pillows. I saw that there was an inner lining that would have been the fire retardant lining inside of that, which is kind of nice to see that that was in place. Okay, so we've talked about different aspects of testing. Let's talk about a few minutes about flaws and defects. That would be defined as any characteristic of a piece of fabric that is visibly inconsistent with the original sample offered by the supplier. In other words, did I just get ripped off? So once you're promised something by a supplier, you can expect them to guarantee that the fabric is as promised. The flaws and defects are not going to be there if they promise that they are not. Fabric manufacturing certainly is an imperfect process, and flaws and defects occur in the course of making fabric. A flaw or defect is any characteristic of a piece of fabric that is visibly inconsistent with the original sample offered by the supplier and upon which the decision to purchase it was made. And certainly flaws and defects do happen in fabric, and they can be sold, but they have to be sold as seconds. They can't be sold as a perfectly quality material. And I think we talked with this class, or it'll come up later on in this class, that one flaw for every 10 yards is what's acceptable in the industry, but the edge of the fabric should be marked with a yarn showing you where that flaw is, so that it's not going to be a surprise to you. So here we have inspectors reviewing finished fabric for flaws before it is shipped from the mill to where you're going to purchase it. So some fabric flaws can be mended before final inspection, and users of fabric are certainly expected to work around infrequent and small flaws. They certainly can't be avoided. But too many flaws, as I mentioned a moment ago, in a bolt result in what are called seconds. We talked about this earlier in the semester, that fabric, I mentioned a fabric store in Santa Monica years ago was all seconds, and I could get some great bargains there, but I knew I was going to have to work around the flaws in the fabric. Fabric is shipped from manufacturers in huge bolts, usually about 60 yards, and you can imagine how heavy that would be. And lighter weight fabrics come in longer lengths, but one defect is allowed, as I mentioned a minute ago, per 10 yards of length. The flaws are marked with a brightly colored thread tied into the selvage at the point where the flaw occurs. So I've actually never seen that, where the flaw is marked with a yarn or a thread, a brightly colored yarn or thread on the selvage. I've never actually seen that, but that is what the rules of the industry provide for. So I'm going to watch for that, see if I see that in the future, marking where a flaw might be. So this is testing, again, for flaws and defects. They're looking at the fabric from a distance to see if all of those threads, those vertical, those horizontal threads, you want them to be perfectly straight. And if they're not, this would be considered another flaw or defect. So in this image, if you looked at this fabric closely, you would see that the filling threads are running very, very straight. On this particular piece of furniture, we can see that the fabric was a little bit skewed. So we have lines, running nice and horizontal, but on here, and we really can't tell if the fabric itself was flawed or if there was just a mistake made in the upholstery project, the upholstery process that skewed the perfectly straight lines. We don't know which way it happened, but this is a flawed piece of furniture because either the fabric didn't hold straight like as it should have been, or it was disordered during the upholstery process. We don't know which, but you don't want to see that kind of skewing in your fabric or in a finished upholstery piece. You certainly don't want to see that. Okay, so that's about all I have to say on on this topic of performance testing and flaws. We're going to watch a video now that kind of assignments are due for next week. So for week 8, you will not be coming to class this week. You're going to read about this assignment on Canvas. You're going to be working individually. I think the assignments online say that you're going to work with a partner, but since COVID, this has been changed to an individual project where you won't be working with anyone else. So you're going to, and the same thing with the final project at the end of the class will be an individual project instead of a group project. So the assignment that you're doing this week is going to take the place of next week's class. So you're going to go look for fabrics that are being used in the real world, and your goal is going to be find 3 to 5 examples of good and bad fabric choices for whatever the application is. So you're going to go into some public space. You can go into a hotel, a restaurant, into a church, into the Ensign College, in a lobby, or in a restaurant, or a cafe, or a fast food place, and you're going to find good and bad examples of fabrics that are appropriate or inappropriate for their end use. And you're going to take pictures of those and upload them onto Canvas. So the assignment online will give you more specific information than that. I think it asks for 5 examples, but 3 to 5 would be fine. 3 good examples and 5, or 3 to 5 good examples and 3 to 5 bad examples. So you'll put those in writing in either a PowerPoint or some other format, and then turn those in as a regular assignment and do that instead of class this week. So good luck with that. Any questions can be sent to me via email on that, but it should be pretty straightforward. Most of my students have not had any trouble with this project. And then make sure those are sent to me on time. Even though we're not meeting in 2 weeks, they are due next week before the beginning of class. So make sure those are done on time. And I will see you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.